Hello. So today we're going to talk about the Habsburg family. We've mentioned them in the past. They popped up in our conversation about the Protestant Reformation when we discussed that they were a ruling family covering a fairly significant portion of Europe during the Protestant Reformation. They are who the French fight against and the Germans fight against in the 30 Years' War. The Habsburgs were staunchly Catholic. And as a result, during the Protestant Reformation, when you have people like Martin Luther popping up who are challenging the authority of the Catholic Church, the Habsburgs were going to counter those claims. This is in the context of largely the 1500s still. So if you think about our entire class so far, everything we've talked about has been happening all at the same time. So the Renaissance is happening in the 1500s. The Protestant Reformation advances in 1517. The Scientific Revolution is in the 15 and 1600s. The Henry VIII is in the 1500s. So all of these things that we're talking about, they're all happening simultaneously. This is such a critical point in history, such a massive point in history, where so much change is happening all at the same time. So the short of it is that, oh, and I spelled that wrong. The short of it is that the Habsburgs themselves are, as rulers, attempting to maintain Catholic control over all of Europe, and ultimately that they fail. It's not something that they're capable of doing. It's not something that historically works out for them. And as a result, the Habsburg Empire no longer exists. We won't get quite that far in this discussion. So if you look at the map, you can see how diverse the Habsburgs are. Everything that's this orange color is the Habsburg Empire. So they are the control what is now modern day Spain. They control islands in the Mediterranean. They control Sicily and the southern portion of Italy, where Naples is. They control northern parts of Italy. They control parts of modern day France. They control the Netherlands and Brussels. And this is Germany, and this is Austria, and this is Czechoslovakia. So they have these and look, they also control all of the Spanish colonies in the New World. So they have this, it's a massive, massive empire. And you can see, like, your notes here mention that it's very diverse, right? It's significant. And that's hopefully what this picture on the bottom represents as well, as the different types of people that might live under the Habsburg Empire. But it's really difficult to control anything that disjointed, that disconnected, but also, like, you have Spanish and you have Italians and you have Dutch and you have Germans and you have Aztecs and you have Inca, and everyone is so dramatically different in their language, in their culture, in their food, in their religions, that there's no unifying force other than your political control. And unfortunately, they're also still trying to maintain Catholicism, which people are shifting away from. And particularly, in the New World, in these sections over here, they'd never even heard of Catholicism until the Spanish arrive in 1492. So that's super difficult. And they also, not just from the Protestant influence that emerges with Luther and Calvin and John Knox and the others, but also from Islamic influence, because you may recall from World History 1 that the Muslim empires in the 6, 7, 8, 900s, the Middle Ages, had expanded from the Middle East across northern Africa, across the Strait of Gibraltar, and into Spain. So there's a massive Islamic culture that dominates especially the southern regions of Spain in the Middle Ages. And it wasn't until King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Aragon and Castile had driven them out of Spain as one of their conquests that the Islamic influence starts to die down a little bit, especially in southern Spain. So it's super complicated, it's super complex, it's super diverse, which in the modern world we see as like this wonderful and amazing thing. But in an absolute government where you're trying to maintain control and you're trying to give the same laws and make sure that everyone's following the same lines, it's not going to work because you don't believe the same things. So there's also going to be this concept of nationalism. We're going to talk about nationalism constantly, but it means pride in your culture, pride in your nation, pride in your religion, pride in the people that speak the same language as you. It's a unifying force. In America, we talk about patriotism, being patriotic. It's the same concept. That's what nationalism is. So that's the Habsburg Empire in a nutshell. But we're actually going to talk specifically, we're going to focus on a man named Charles V. So Charles V is the Holy Roman Emperor, which means that he's in control of all of those lands that we showed you at the beginning. But he is genuinely in control of the largest landmass in history since Charlemagne in the early Middle Ages. Charlemagne is a king in the 800s. And so for the last 700 years, kingdoms have been much, much smaller. But he controls the largest since then. We often talk about a phrase called the sun never set on the British Empire, the concept that the British owned so much land by the 1800s that literally somewhere in Britain, because you think about Canada and Australia and India and Africa, the sun was always up. That concept actually first applies to the reign of Charles V as the Holy Roman Emperor. When he's born, he is the heir to 3 major kingdoms of Europe. He's the heir to the throne in Spain, to a throne in Italy, and to the throne of Austria, which makes him extremely powerful. His aunt is going to become Catherine, Henry VIII's first wife. He's multiple times been in his childhood engaged to various members of the French throne. France is one of the major enemies of the Spanish. And twice they tried to unite the thrones of France and Spain to limit some of that conflict. But unfortunately, both of those princesses pass away before they reach the age to be married. But really, the deal with Charles V is his goal was to reunite Europe. So this happens a couple of times in history where men try to unite all of Europe under one kingdom again. It hasn't happened since the Roman Empire, the fall of Rome in 476. And he tries to do it, and he tries to unite under a Catholic empire. And really, if anybody was probably going to do it up to this point in history, he's got a fairly big claim because he's got Brussels and he's got, all those lands. So he's more able to piece together things. But ultimately, his wars are very expensive and fail miserably. And he has to squash rebellions and revolutions throughout his time period. It's really sad. But he's actually a unique character. He's very well liked by the nobles of Europe. He's very intelligent. He's very well educated. He spoke many, many languages. And a favorite quote that I have from Charles V is when he was talking about the languages that he speaks. And what he says, let me make sure I get it right. What he says is he speaks Spanish to God, Italian to women, French to men, and German to his horse. So he's just sort of pointing out different things that he knows, but also sort of the way in which you would approach people differently. Ultimately, he is forced to abdicate, and abdicate means to give up the throne. He doesn't give up all the power that he controls, but basically what it is, he piecemeals apart his empire. So he divides, much like happens after Charlemagne, actually, he divides his empire into a couple of different pieces, ending the Holy Roman Empire entirely. Because he recognizes that it's impossible to hold that kind of standard. So in this, that's what this picture is. This picture is the abdication of Brussels, is what they call it, where he divides up his empire. And he actually, you can see, he only lives to be 58. He was fairly sick. So the land is divided up among several people after his death. But it shrinks down the empires of Europe, but Spain retains most of the land, especially in the New World. So Spain becomes still a fairly significant major power. I was going to tell you, he seems to be very sick. He suffers from various things, including epilepsy, which is terrifying, even for modern standards. But he also comes down with gout, and he battles gout for most of his life. And by the end of his fairly short life, his gout is so bad that he cannot walk very much. And so anytime he had to move from place to place, he had servants whose job it was to pick up his throne, his chair, and carry him from room to room because he couldn't walk, which is just really sad. So, but not to give away. I mean, I don't want you guys to like love him and feel so wonderful about him. Hernán Cortés is obviously responsible. It's the same time period. He's responsible for Charles V, and it's under Cortés and Charles V's leadership that millions of native peoples in the New World are slaughtered in the name of Spanish conquest. So, and he has a lot of wars, right? We talked about that, and lots of Europeans are going to be killed in his efforts to maintain world power. So he's kind of a conundrum, Charles V is. So, if you have any questions, let me know. Bye, guys.